I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from a conservative libertarian commentator by the name of Jack Hunter. I've been familiar with his work for a number of years. We, of course, don't agree 100% of the time, but I think that should go without saying. I mean, people know where my politics are. People who know Jack know where his politics are. However, there are points of agreement. Not necessarily a total ideological alignment, but points of agreement, especially on the primary loss of Thomas Massie and issues like the surveillance state and the potential for the arbitrary misuse of the domestic terrorist label. You'll hear us talk about that in the conversation to follow. It's an interesting one. I think it's always interesting to have on a guest from, I guess, the opposite end of the tracks politically, is how many people would put it. I'm kind of all over the place at this point politically, at least within the, I guess, colloquial definitions that we have of left and right, although I think most people would see me as left or left-leaning. In any case, I think Jack will have something to aggravate both the right and the left at various points in the conversation to follow. I know that his views on Jan 6 will upset many of my liberal or left listeners, and his views on Black Lives Matter will upset many of my more conservative or even potentially, I guess, libertarian listeners. I don't know. In any case, I think it's an interesting conversation. It's not a debate. There were some points, if we had some more time, then I may have pushed back more on Jack, but for this conversation, I wanted to delve into his views and to get an idea of where many are at when it comes to MAGA or the America First movement, because there's a lot of dissension in the ranks at this point. So I really wanted to delve into that. Where are many who supported Trump in the past now? And I hope that gives listeners an idea of what I was going for in this conversation. We also find some points of agreement, and it's overall a fascinating conversation, I hope. But before we get to that, I need to stop rambling, get to the conversation, JG, right? Well, before we do that, please, if you can, support me on Patreon, patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And if you can, please consider supporting my sponsor, Mike Swanson of the excellent financial and trading newsletter, wallstreetwindow.com. You can sign up for the newsletter free of charge. I highly recommend it. I've had listeners make a return on investment thanks to Mike's trading tips. So head on over to wallstreetwindow.com, sign up for the newsletter. And with that being said, let's get right to it with Jack Hunter. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest I'm really happy to have on. I've been reading his work for some time. I was probably reading him even in college when I identified more as a libertarian, and I still appreciate a lot of his writing. I'm talking with Jack Hunter, who has written for the Washington Examiner, the Daily Caller, the American Conservative, Spectator USA, Politico. He's been in the Daily Beast, and of course, our friends at Responsible Statecraft and the Libertarian Institute. And he is the co-author of The Tea Party Goes to Washington by Senator Rand Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm very happy to have you on. I've always found you to be a very principled voice. And I think we have a lot to talk about with regards to not just Thomas Massie and his unfortunate primary loss, but just this utter madness we're seeing with Israel right now, and the U.S. and the Israel lobby, and just the way that the U.S. seems to be taken for a ride by this little country in the Middle East and Netanyahu and the Likud party. And it's aggravating to me.
Yeah, no, it's a real shame, and it's shameful. You know, I voted for Donald Trump the first time in 2024. I didn't vote for him before. I voted third party, as I often do, but precisely because I saw Kamala Harris running around with Liz Cheney and mocking Trump for saying he would use diplomacy over war. He's not tough enough. I'll be tough. I'm like, oh, hell no. We don't want this. Hillary Clinton didn't win. We don't want this dumber version of it to win with Liz Cheney as the defense secretary or whatever. And Trump was saying what he said in every other campaign. And we're going to end endless wars, no regime change wars. We're going to be for freedom of speech, all kinds of stuff. And he's completely betrayed every bit of that. We are here now where he's bent over backward for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, giving them everything they want. Think about this. George W. Bush, as disastrous as he was, and going into Iraq based on false premises, there were no WMDs. One of the most unpopular foreign policy decisions, certainly in my lifetime, but in American history, one of the biggest mistakes in American history, the polling. Even he, Benjamin Netanyahu, would have loved for George W. Bush to go into Iran and do what Trump's doing now. Even he didn't do that. Have a president who's finally a big enough dupe to do it. And as we're recording this, we're hearing that Trump was on the phone, reaming Bibi, telling him his ass would have been in prison if not for him, F you and all sorts of stuff. And, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm glad to see it because this is never going to end until the president of the United States, whoever they may be, stands up to Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and says no. Ronald Reagan said no. George H.W. Bush said no. By modern Republican standards, those two guys would be considered anti-Semitic, which is stupid. But that gives you a little taste of where I'm coming from on this issue.
Did you happen to see that tweet that Netanyahu made immediately afterwards where he was saying, I had a talk with Trump, and then he's reiterating, I will attack Lebanon if Hezbollah does anything.
Yeah.
It's just, it's bizarre.
Yeah, you can trust him as far as you can throw him. He's a liar through and through. He's been lying. I'm in my early 50s. I just had a birthday yesterday. He's been lying about Iran being on the brink of nuclear weapons since I was in high school. I graduated high school in 1992. But at that time, me, got my locker. I'm in high school. I'm a kid. Benjamin Netanyahu was saying we're 2 weeks away from Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And none of the other presidents, Bill Clinton, Obama, Biden, George W. Bush fell for it. This president did. And that's
What was that last part? You cut out there for a second.
it's just shameful that Trump bought this. I mean, I don't ever think of Trump as a stupid person. I might disagree, but like this is a stupid decision. Like what's going on? Was he in the Epstein files? Like what is this? I don't know. People are speculating for a reason. I don't know. I just threw that out there, but like it doesn't make any sense based on what he promised and how he's acting as president.
Let's talk about your article for the Libertarian Institute. Massey's detractors still pretend the Israel lobby doesn't exist. I was just gutted by Massey's loss because, he's worked with even Democrats like Ro Khanna on very important
Sure.
issues like the War Powers Resolution. I think he's very useful on a lot of stuff, and I agree with him on a lot of things, including not just war, but also issues of the surveillance state and opposing
Right.
that and getting the Epstein files out there. And yet we have him losing to a guy who is calling for bringing back the draft. How does this
Right.
happen?
It could happen by three pro-Zionist, pro-Israel billionaires dumping ungodly amounts of money into one Kentucky district. It happens by people who only watch Fox News, don't even know what the internet is or barely use it, seeing commercials of Thomas Massie going with AOC and Ilhan Omar, whatever it was, AI generated things into a hotel room, a thruple, they called it, the things, who believed it's just made up crap that all these, Miriam Adelson and all these billionaires paid for, AIPAC, all that kind of stuff. That's what happened. Anybody who thinks this is a victory, like, oh, this is Republican politics to come and what? No, that was a last gasp. A lot of those people won't be around to vote the next time because they'll no longer be with us. That's a way of putting that lightly because they're older. With voters under 55, Massey won 80-20. Like 80% pro Massey, 20% would vote the other way. So that's what this is. And you put that kind of money. Why was that the most expensive primary race in American history? One issue, Israel. And a guy who dares to say, hey, I ain't got nothing against these people. I like Jewish people. I'm not an anti-Semite, but I'm for America first. And I don't think we should give Israel this much, certainly not military, not financially, certainly not to, the disadvantage of my own country. But that's the status quo. That's what Trump does. And Massey paid a price for it. I will say this. I know you said it gutted you. And on that primary election day, I was like, come on, these people can't be this goofy. Like they're really going to buy it. I thought he was going to win. Like a little more faith in humanity than maybe I should have. Um, but in retrospect, I kind of wonder if he's allowed to run again for something. We don't know what that is. If in retrospect, maybe this was a better outcome and the force Massey can become. Marjorie Taylor Greene's not a congresswoman anymore, but damn, she's a force and she's out there. So, Massey doesn't seem like he's going anywhere.
Now, it's funny because you mentioned in this article the commentary editor, John Podhoretz, after Massey's defeat, saying, "We have to use what means there are at our disposal, and that is Jewish money." And I thought to myself, that's the most anti-Semitic thing you could say, because
He
you're
was
conflating Zionism or supporting Israel with, you're conflating the two things, Zionism and anti-Semitism.
Well, and that's somebody like myself who's not a bigot. Some of the greatest people speaking about this, truth to power, like Dave Smith, who's Jewish, Glenn Greenwald, who's Jewish. This is not about that. And when I encounter genuine anti-Semitism in like my social and comments, I remove it immediately and usually block those people. But to allow pro-war people, speaking broadly, to conflate, hey, I don't like what Israel's doing, I don't like what the U.S. is doing for them, with being anti-Semitic is BS. Now here comes John Podhoretz, as you just mentioned, whose father was Norman Podhoretz, a sort of neoconservative dynasty, who's, neocons have been different things in different eras in the 60s, crime and stuff, but we're here in 2026 and they're all about war. And John Podhoretz, as a Jewish American, is saying, yes, we're going to use Jewish money to do this. Hey, points for being honest, because that is what's going on. That's what Miriam Adelson's doing and all these other different people. But it also kind of plays into a cartoon stereotype about what's being done. I agree with you there. When I saw him say that, I was kind of laughed. I was like, okay, sure. Like you're saying it out loud. I got kudos for honesty, I guess. I don't know. Like, because if I said that, oh, you're an anti-Semite, but he's a Jewish American saying, yeah, this is what we're doing. We should. Okay, yeah, I agree with you, but like, who can talk about this and who can't?
I wanted to ask you because I've been following American Conservative and people like yourself and Kelly Vlahos for a long time. Scott Horton was a big influence on this show. It seems as if for the past 2, 3 decades, we've had to see these neoconservative commentators, the Podhoretzes, the Mark Levins of the world, basically attack anyone who criticizes Israel from the right as being not just anti-Semites, but unpatriotic or fake conservatives, or now I think they're using the term the woke right. How do you feel about this attempt by neoconservative commentators and so-called intellectuals to destroy any criticism of Israel from the right wing in America?
Well, it bothered me when that stuff worked. When it was 2003 and David Frum could write unpatriotic conservatives at National Review, denouncing anybody on the right who was against the Iraq War. Ron Paul was on that list, Pat Buchanan, Robert Novak. But that worked back then. Somebody like a David Frum could be like, oh, you're anti-Semitic if you oppose this thing. We've reached critical mass where that crap don't work anymore. That's why Tucker Carlson's one of the most important voices in American politics right now. He meets that stuff dead on and calls BS on it. Mark Levin years ago, who's been coming after me for many, many years, especially when I worked for Senator Paul, would say neocon is not a real thing and it's a word made up. It just means Jewish. And if you use it, then you're being anti-Semitic. That's what he used to say. Now that Trump has said it many, many times, and people that he's supposedly aligned with use the word openly, he has to say, oh, anybody who uses the word neocon, which exists, he acknowledges in his own backward kind of way, is anti-Semitic. None of that works anymore. People don't. But all right, that bothers me for a reason, because there are people who are actually bigots out there who should be called out. But when everybody's a bigot, nobody's a bigot. I remember watching, this would have been during the 2016 cycle, The View, and Joy Behar goes, Richard Spencer has lost faith in Donald Trump, and the audience applauded. Now, Richard Spencer is a genuine white supremacist, like white nationalist. Like, he will tell you that. And all that mattered to them was this guy who identified with Trump didn't like him anymore. That's what I'm talking about. That's how stupid this gets. But then, like, I'm an anti-Semite and a bigot, which I'm not, because I'm critical of Israel's government, whereas Richard Spencer gets a pass you see on matters of race and hatred and all that kind of stuff. That's where we're at. So it's not only does it not work anymore, and that's a good thing because we can have open and honest debate. There's been more debate in the country of Israel about their own government than there has been in the United States in the last 20 years. We're finally getting to a point where that's changing, and I think that's good. If that answers your question a little bit.
No, it definitely does. And one thing I wanted to get into, just for the sake of my audience, is I wanted you to talk a little bit about why conservatives should be questioning the U.S. Israel special relationship, because I think it's not just a matter of humanitarianism. I mean, I do think there are people like yourself and Dave Smith that do get upset when they're seeing Palestinian children being burned to
Of
death. But
course.
there's also another issue at play here, and I think it's that the view is, for many conservatives, that why are we fighting wars for this?
Right. It's all of that for me, and I can only speak for myself, but from coming from just a general conservative perspective, which is how you began that question, we first have to define what does it mean to be a conservative. Part of the battle you're seeing between like Mark Levin and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham being really mad at Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Kelly Vlahos and Scott Horton, will throw in all my friends there, is that neoconservatives have been able to define in the United States, being on the American right meant you were a neocon. They didn't call it that because that was to show your cards. But, I'm somebody who was in talk radio at the tail end of the George W. Bush era who quit calling myself a conservative because people are like, oh, yeah, Liz Cheney or Dick Cheney, thumbs up. I'm like, no, that's not where I'm coming from. But there's a deeper American conservative tradition represented by libertarians like Ron Paul and his son Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, going all the way back to Barry Goldwater. Ronald Reagan had flavors of this, certainly Pat Buchanan when he ran in 96 and 2000, going all the way back to Robert Taft, who was Mr. Republican, has a statue in Washington, D.C. that is, I wouldn't say it's anti-war, though some of it is. Ron Paul would say that. Pat Buchanan would probably say that. But it's non-intervention. It's restraint. It's going back to John Quincy Adams, who said we should not go abroad and look in search of monsters to slay. I'm probably up, but some of the listeners, viewers might know what I'm talking about. That's the original or older, deeper American conservative tradition that's come up again, partly because of Trump's campaigns, partly because of what Ron Paul did before that, the Tea Party, and it's warring with the neoconservatives who are like, hell no, we get to define this. Being a conservative in America means you're for Israel, no questions asked, fight every war we possibly can, and spend as much money as it takes to do it. Whereas a real conservative would be like, how about we look out for our own country first and be more financially responsible and make sure Americans have more liberty and less government, that kind of basic stuff. And neocons hate that. So that's the war you're seeing going on writ large right now. Donald Trump, why it's such a betrayal, ran on the older conservatism, even if he couldn't really recognize it or articulate it. That's what it was. And now that he's in office, has joined forces with all the neocons, all the never Trumpers that were with Hillary Clinton in 2016 and voted for Kamala Harris, are with Trump now. There's a reason for that because he's become like them. He's a neocon now.
I was just going to add to that. I think the conservative case, and I think it's very strong, is that if we're going to go to war, it should be in the national interest, that the
Correct.
concern should be national interest. And I've always found that a very compelling argument. Why are we going to war with Iraq? Are they a threat to us? No. Why would we go to war with them? Same with Iran.
Right. Well, and part of the promise, from the founders era of the United States and its founding is that this vast ocean separated us from Europe and those old partisan problems that led to war and whatnot. And, World War One was an awful mistake. Um, World War Two, I think, was justifiable. That was probably the last one. It's the last time we were declared war. Vietnam was a disaster. Kuwait, even though it was quick and popular at the time, it led to, parts of the Iraq War, which was a disaster, and Afghanistan for 20 years. Um, if you look at the polls, none of that's popular. The thing with Trump and going into Iran like he did in late February, when Bush went into Iraq in 2003, even though it was complete BS about WMDs and a mushroom cloud and all that, at least 9/11 happened and he had popular support, even though it was built on lies. That's what was happening. The polling before Iran was most Americans didn't want this to happen. The logic was I'm Trump. BB wants this. I mean, like, this idea that they had nuclear weapons. Even Tulsi Gabbard, his own director of national intelligence, said that the intelligence said that that wasn't true. And the entire intelligence community, if you listen to Joe Kent, who was in the administration, sort of a dissonant voice now, said that. It was unpopular when he started it, and it's even more unpopular now that it's failing so miserably. So this is a failed presidency right now. No matter what else happens, the Democrats are going to kick the Republicans' ass in the midterms. They're going to have a lame duck president for 2 years. This is a failed presidency.
It was funny. I was watching a clip of the comedian Tim Dillon recently, who
Mhm.
was telling Piers Morgan this is the biggest betrayal of MAGA that Trump could have done. I was wondering if you would comment on just how big of a betrayal is this?
Well, he's right. I agree with Tim Dillon. It's like, if I tell you my favorite color is red and I go around screaming my favorite color is red and you get on board with that, millions of people are like, yeah, red's the best color. I'm like, guess what? It's blue. I mean, it's that simple. He said A, B, and C, and it betrayed all of that. The only thing that any conservative can give him credit for, and I have a problem with how a lot of this was carried out with ICE and whatnot, is the immigration stuff. Biden did leave the border like completely open in a totally irresponsible way, and Trump cracked down on that in what some would argue, including me, a heavy-handed way that went a little too far, but he did do it. Other than that, Doge is gone. Remember those days? Here's Elon Musk. We're going to go through every department. We're going to go, inventory the Fort Knox and all that stuff. All that's gone for bloated, huge, historic Pentagon budgets. Financial conservatism, responsibility, whatever that Thomas Massie represented, out the freaking window. And it's war with no end in sight. I'm glad he yelled at BB. I hope he does it more. I like what Thomas Massie tweeted. He's like, don't give them any aid for a month. And so the straight of hard moves will be fine. Like, this war will end. Like, that's all it really is. Just stop supporting these people. This government. I shouldn't say these people, this government specifically.
I wanted to say, one of the most frustrating aspects of the aftermath of Massey's primary loss was, I have a lot of friends on the left. I'm sort of on the social
Mhm.
democrat
I do
side of
too.
things. Bernie Sanders, yeah, you know what. But it's interesting because I keep seeing people on the left saying, I don't like Thomas Massie, but, and I'm like, why do you even have to say that? No, it's like, I understand you and I would probably disagree on a lot of things. There doesn't have to be some like ideological coalition between left and right, but we can come together on very specific issues, which is
Yeah,
what Thomas Massie has done in the past with Ro Khanna. It's what Rand Paul did with Bernie Sanders when it came to the Yemen War Powers resolution.
right.
And I'm just confused at why people think they have to, that they can't do these issue by issue sort of, it's not even like a coalition. It's just working together on issues that we can come together on.
I'm not confused about it at all. Let me say first, I am fully in favor and have been a part of and argued for any left-right coalitions where honest progressives and real conservatives or libertarians can agree on specific issues and get stuff done. This is not new. Ron Paul did it with Dennis Kucinich when he was in Congress. Um, Pat Buchanan ran for president on the Reform Party ticket in 2000 with Lenora Fulani. A lot of people won't know that name. She was a socialist, basically, but they agreed on labor issues and war. And like the point is, this is not new. Rand Paul partners with Ron Wyden on issues of civil liberties, and who's a Democrat, and surveillance. This is nothing new about this. Thomas Massie, Ro Khanna. Why I'm not confused about people's reactions. Their partisan heart is, I love Trump or I hate Trump. So Thomas Massie, when he was defending the J6ers, remember that? You ask anybody on the left, oh, that guy's an absolute monster. What a right wing crazy. Him and Marjorie Taylor Greene are just friends, blah, 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 blah. All right. Fast forward a couple of years. He's against Trump. Massie hasn't changed a single view. Trump certainly has. Massie hasn't changed nothing. And you'll see progressives say, you know, I can't get with Thomas Massie on everything, but it's what you just said, because their heart is, do I love Trump or hate Trump? It's all about Trump. That's what Trump derangement syndrome is. It's not about the issue, it's that. And they can get to the issue, but past that first. And this works for the old boomer Republicans that even though Trump has done the exact opposite, like I'm still with Trump, their love for Trump is what comes first, not what they might have liked him saying in 2024. That's out the window. So none of that's ever confusing to me. That's a human nature thing. I'm not even talking down about people. That's just how people are. Let me give you one example of that. Do you remember that kind of crappy movie that came out about Dick Cheney a couple years ago, Vice?
Vaguely.
It's not a very good movie, but I went
Okay.
and saw it with a loved one who expressed a desire to want to see it, who's not very political, votes Republican. And we watched it and whatever, we left. And they got all the Iraq war stuff right, kind of like how they lied us in the war and Condoleezza Rice and mushroom clouds and all that kind of stuff. They got that right, but the movie wasn't very good. So we go get dinner and we're talking about it, da 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 da. And this person goes, "You know who I wish," we're in South Carolina, "you know who I wish would become president? Nikki Haley." And I said to this love person, loved one, I'm saying that because that's what's going on. I'm like, "You remember that stuff we just saw in this movie? And like when you came out, you said, man, they really lied to us about Iraq. Nikki Haley wants to do that again." And this person who I love very much said, "Yeah, but I just really like her." So to your question about why do people say, but that's where most people are. I hate Trump. I love Trump. Nikki Haley. I don't like Nikki Haley. I like, and then all the rest. I'm not saying all people are like that, but it is a general human nature thing. On the left in particular, I have hope that we can see a better left with people like Ro Khanna. Bernie Sanders is kind of wishy-washy. And my hope is that progressives who are sort of fed up with the establishment of their own party and the Democrats look at somebody like Ro Khanna and be like, hey, he's with me. I'm a Democrat. He's a Democrat. I'm a progressive. He's progressive. But he goes against his own party on matters of war and peace. And he aligns with Thomas Massie on the same things, the Epstein files, all that. So I have hope that there's a better left. I mean, if Marco Rubio and Ro Khanna are running for president, that's an easy choice for me. And I usually vote for the Republican, and it wasn't in that race. So I'm probably all over the place with this. But
I also wanted to ask you about your thoughts on just the crazy statements we've been hearing from the Israeli far right recently when it comes to the US. Before I got on with you, I was watching this clip of the spy and traitor to the United States, Jonathan Pollard. And he said
right,
this within this year. He was arguing that that Israel should threaten the US with nukes. It was in the Jerusalem Post. And then today I find out Itamar Ben-Gvir, right, the Israeli national security minister, he says the time has come to do what duty requires, and what is required is to strike Hezbollah, et cetera, et cetera. And he basically says, oh, we need to tell Trump off. We need to tell Trump off. And I'm
right,
thinking to myself, what is this? It's like he's saying it's time to say no to Trump. Well, what is the US is giving you all this aid?
right,
It's it reminds me of that alleged quote from Bill Clinton where he met Netanyahu and he came out of the meeting and said, who's the effing superpower here? Who's this guy think
right.
he is? But that's what I mean, this is crazy making that these Israeli figures with a lot of power can say these things.
I think Netanyahu should follow the advice of those far right leaders and be antagonistic towards Donald Trump and see what that looks like, because that's going to be better for my country. For my president, Donald Trump, it's all about him and his ego. Hides everything. And if this guy's coming at him, what do you think that's going to look like? It's going to be better for America. So yes, Israeli far right. Keep saying those things to Benjamin Netanyahu. What pisses me off about those guys, the Likud party and all the other stuff, they will openly say in Israeli media, like, for genocide of the Palestinians and let's kill them all, and different versions of that. And in our own country, we have to pretend, oh, there's no genocide. But wait, I'm looking on TikTok. There's like dead kids and stuff, and my tax dollars paid for that. No, there's a bunch of them. It happens every day, and they're all scared of these silver things flying around in the sky and have nightmares about them and stuff. Oh, that's not happening. No, to me, that's as bad as Holocaust denial. Like that happened. That happened. This is happening. And you call Marjorie Taylor Greene was the first Republican to call it a genocide. Massey says that openly now because that's what it is. That's what the UN has called it and other nations around the world. That's what it is. It's the targeting of a certain ethnicity for extermination, and the government of Israel is doing that. And the saddest part is it's coming from an ethnicity who it was done to in World War II, who should know better. When I say that, I'm talking about the government of Israel. There are plenty of people in Israel and plenty of Jewish Americans who are dead set against what's going on in Gaza.
Yeah, and the gaslighting over it is all very crazy. You point this out and it's just you get yelled at as being an anti-Semite, or even with I know you probably don't agree with Mamdani on a lot of things, but he has every right not to join that Israeli parade that they had in New York, especially when you have Smotrich being there. What? Why would I? Maybe he doesn't want to associate with a far right, bigoted Israeli nationalist that
I
wants to
can get
kill
that.
Gazans.
I could get that aspect, and I'm curious your opinion on this because the way I look at that, I say he's the mayor of New York City. He and I probably agree on what Israel's government is doing in Gaza and the genocide and the horror. Is that a parade celebrating the state of Israel or just Jewish Americans? I think it's just Jewish Americans, right? So to me, you go to that parade. Maybe if you stay out, you specifically say what you just said. I ain't rubbing shoulders with that piece of crap, something like that. But to me, that's rejecting Jewish Americans, of which there are a lot in New York City. So I don't know that I agree with his decision. If he could make it clear about it's the government, and like, I don't think it's right to be against your Jewish constituents or to come across that way. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I didn't. I should have researched that beforehand. If it was just an Israeli parade or
I've
a
seen nobody else say this because people assume we agree on foreign policy, like, yeah, and I'm like, wait, hold on a second now. This is a little more nuanced than that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't like the guy. He's a socialist. I think everybody in New York is gonna screw it up, but like, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I'm 50-50 on that.
but it's just very weird seeing these. I mean, even seeing Smotrich attending a parade with Chuck Schumer, and just to see him be sort of embraced by New York, it was.
So
I
that's
don't
the
know.
thing. Chuck Schumer is essentially no different than Mark Levin or Ted Cruz.
Right.
Like, he ain't going to say genocide, and if they kill all these kids, he's happy about that. That's what he wants to happen. That's what he thinks should happen, and that's detestable. That's awful. I mean, what are you talking about here? So, I mean, if that's what the mayor of New York stayed away from, hell, I'd stay away from that too. But he needs to make it clear there are plenty of Jewish people in New York who would agree with him on what's going on in Israel's bad or what's going on in Gaza's bad. You know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't do anything.
I looked it up. Apparently, the theme of the parade this year was "Proud Americans, Proud Zionists."
I would not go to that parade. All right, never mind. Bobby's 100% right. I am not a Zionist. I don't believe from a Christian perspective, I sure as hell don't believe in that. As we're talking, Mike Huckabee gave a graduation speech somewhere today saying, I'm a proud Zionist. The whole speech was about that. Those poor kids graduating or whatever age they are, like having to listen to that crap. So, yeah, I wouldn't have been part of that parade. I didn't know that was the title. I thought it was just for Jewish Americans.
Well, that was the theme of this year's parade: "Proud Americans, Proud Zionists."
Yeah, some of the most Orthodox Jews in New York are anti-Zionists.
Right. Oh, you know what? I since you mentioned your Christianity, your article sort of deals with how you have some of these sort of Catholic conservative commentators like Mike Knowles making fun of
Yeah,
this idea that AIPAC played a role in Massey's loss, and you took issue with Knowles, and
I
you
did.
brought Catholicism into it.
It drives me up a wall. And look, like Carrie Prejean Bowler, who I don't know, and I like a lot of what she's saying. I'm a newcomer. I was confirmed at Easter. I've been going to mass for 2.5 years, but I kind of understand it and believe in it.
Welcome to the club. I'm a fellow Catholic as well.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I find it life changing and exciting and exhilarating. Being the kind of person I am, I have faith that goes far beyond anything going on in my brain, but I still got this brain, and I think the way I think. And when I'm seeing Pope Leo, there's something cosmic about being an American Catholic who just got here. I was raised by agnostic parents. I wasn't even raised in a religious household. Just got here, like G.K. Chesterton. I could go on and on. Flannery O'Connor, but just got here. The new Pope is American. Okay, like that's cool. He's from Chicago. He's probably drank that gross shot they do, Malort or whatever it is. And him out there heroically talking about the barbaric stuff that's going on in Gaza. That was his word, not mine. And he's speaking out against the war in Iran. And I see Bishop Robert Barron, who I've got a lot of respect with and has a lot to do with my own Catholic journey, go on Ben Shapiro's show. And Ben Shapiro says, Hey, do you think he's talking about Iran? And Bishop Robert Barron goes, No. I'm like, What? What the hell is that? That's exactly the moment that Ben Shapiro and his audience need to hear from a high profile American Catholic. Yes, that's what he's talking about. Then Pope Leo was even more explicit after that. Michael Knowles on the Daily Wire, who I like when he gets into apologetics. I love it. Conversations with him and Matt Fradd and Father Mike Schmitz and all these people. That's sort of my podcast world as much as any political stuff. It's all the Catholic stuff. When clearly pro-Israel billionaires were a major contributing factor to the defeat of Thomas Massie. And he goes, "Oh, John Cornyn lost in Texas. Are we still going to talk about Israel's influence?" It's like, are you? He's not a stupid person. That's Michael Knowles downplaying the influence of that Zionist perspective and the pro-Israel AIPAC stuff in Massey's district as a Catholic. At the same time, Pope Leo is out there like, "No, this is bunk. This shouldn't be happening." Uh, Matt Walsh, who's been more outspoken than Michael Knowles, questioning the war and whatnot, goes through long periods where nothing said about Israel. We know they work with or for Ben Shapiro. I don't know what the pecking order is there, but you don't have to connect. You can connect the dots of what I'm saying. When Carrie Prejean Bowler got kicked off of that, and y'all know who I'm talking about. She's the former beauty queen contestant or winner, Miss America or whatever it was. I'm probably getting that wrong, but she's a new Catholic like me. She was asking the rabbis on Trump's Religious Liberty Commission, she's like, "I'm not a Zionist. Is that anti-Semitic, basically?" And they were like, "Yeah." And that's not what we believe as Catholics. That's not Christian teaching going all the way back to the apostles and Christ himself. That's something that they've just come up with evangelicals in the last 200 years, the Schofield Bible, John Darby Nelson, all this kind of stuff. And enough American evangelicals have been duped into believing that this is somehow biblical. I'm like, y'all know the new covenant's Jesus Christ, right? It's not the state of Israel founded in 1948. And apparently Mike Huckabee doesn't believe that. He told us again today at a graduating class. I'm like, what the hell? What kind of Christian is that? That's weird. But here we are, and she's speaking out saying this is BS, this is heretical. She gets kicked off, and people actually believe that, like Paula Kane, White Kane, are still there with Trump and all that kind of stuff. At first, I thought she was being a little too aggressive, and I'm like, come on, we just got here. We're new Catholics. We don't know what we're talking about. Let's show others and other faiths even. But then when I saw how people reacted to her and how Michael Knowles don't say anything or even says the wrong thing and what Bishop Robert Barron did, I'm like, no, maybe somebody needs to be wilding out like she is. I took a different approach. So uh, I tried to be careful. I have thoughts about this, but I just got here. One of the things I like about the Catholic faith is I'm going to be dead one day, and there's so many wonderful things about the saints and salvation history that I'm never going to learn it all. That's how beautiful and wondrous it is. Was it, I think C.S. Lewis was an Anglican who said, to Protestants, Catholicism is an overrun jungle, and to Catholics, Protestantism is a barren wasteland or something like that. I understand what he means by that. He wasn't even Catholic. There's just so much there. Um, I don't pretend to be an expert, is what I'm saying, but these basic things I think I can speak with some kind of knowledge.
I also wanted to ask you, this is aside from the Catholic thing, but with Mike Knowles, I've noticed, and I'm not attacking him saying this, but
I don't
I
want
think
to. Yeah.
well, he's sort of said before, you know, I'll talk about Israel at times, but it- I think some people talk about Israel too much. So what I wanted you to address was there's a certain type of conservative that says, well, why do we have to talk about Israel so much? And I think the reason for many conservatives like yourself is that ultimately you can't have conservatism without a restrained foreign policy.
Well, there's that, but I would pose the question this way. Why did Rush Limbaugh spend his entire professional career talking about the American government so much? Because he's the most prominent conservative voice in America, and what we're worried about is the government having too much power and taking too much of our money. So you know what? Rush Limbaugh, for his entire career on the radio, is going to talk about the American government all the time. What reality have we been living with as it relates to Israel, U.S.-Israel relations for decades now, and we're reaching a high point now, is them taking advantage of us and American officials letting them do it, us giving them ungodly amounts of money to do things that are unpopular with most Americans if you look at the polling, and are actually killing people and doing that. Yes, I'm going to talk about that all the time for the same reason Rush Limbaugh talked about the American government all the time, as do I, especially what the American government's doing with the Israel government. I understand what people are saying, that maybe like it's a fixation, and that's where they say, oh, you're anti-Semitic because you're fixated on this. You have to look at the problem, and that's the Israel's government, and what they do with us is a problem. It is a primary problem. And I would say that if we were doing that with the government of Zimbabwe or the government of Antarctica or the South Pole or anybody, but that's who it happens to be.
Something else I wanted to ask you is it's been very joyful for me to see Mark Levin losing his mind lately. He's just
Same.
having a meltdown going on about, if we lose the Iran war, it'll be because of the anti-war right. And I'm
Yeah, right.
thinking to myself, I don't know if you have opinions on this, but I've always wondered where does Mark Levin come from? This guy wrote a whole book about American Marxism where he kept referring to the Frankfurt School as the Franklin School. He doesn't have a fact checker. I
Right.
mean, he's a very odd dude, and just he's not. I don't understand how he has an audience. I don't know anyone in real life that's a big fan,
I
but
do.
where's the backing come from?
I do understand what I said earlier about the neoconservatives are used to being the sole definers of what it means to be a conservative in the United States. He's part of that. He comes from that generation. He's a Bush, Cheney, talk radio Republican. That's what he is. Israel first. Any war is a good war. There's no such thing as torture. We've never done that. There's no such thing as genocide. All that package, all the neocon stuff, that's what Mark Levin is. There's enough older Americans who are still in that. Now, Trump got them to put their foot in another place for a little bit, which I was very excited about, talking about getting rid of regime change wars and Iraq was a mistake. Bush lied. So he confused it, but they were formatted in that. And Mark Levin speaks to that, and he wants that still to be true. When he's type caps and really upset, that's what that is at the heart of it, is he's losing that. That's his identity. That's who he is. That's what he is. And that audience is dwindling. And the audience that's growing is Tucker Carlson. The transformation, or maybe that's a little unfair, that Megyn Kelly, where she's landed with all this kind of stuff. I think Tom Woods and Dave Smith are great voices. Joe Rogan, who's not even trying to be political, is just, I think his show's so popular because there's lots of people out there who want to see somebody who's just intellectually curious because they're intellectually curious. And he does that as a guy who's got some intelligence and he's curious.
Theo Vaughn is another one, that comedian. Yeah.
Theo Vaughn's awesome, great hair, all that stuff. And he traveled with Trump over to the Middle East, but is willing to say Massey's awesome and what the hell's Trump doing? That's, by the way, that's a big part of the coalition that delivered Trump the victory in 2024. When Barron, Trump's son's like, hey, Dad, these podcasts are where it's at for people who aren't over 80. You should do some of these. He's like, all right, he did it, and it helped him greatly. And all those podcasters, to a man, are now like, what the hell is this? And they're rejecting what Trump is doing.
I I get what you're saying, but do you think there's also was there a concerted effort by special interests and a lot of funding given to people like Levin or Ben Shapiro over the years? Was there an AIPAC thing going on there like there was with Massie?
Yeah, and you see the thing with, I guess, some AIPAC dollars went to, but Scott Jennings and one of the conservative umbrella groups. I don't want to name names, get sued or anything like that, but yeah, I think a lot of that stuff happens. We could talk about that. Thomas Massie could probably glad tell you how many dollars and where they went in his own district and to what. And he's right, and I hope he keeps talking about it. And knowing him a little bit, I think he will. I think that's
The
important.
reason I mention that, by the way, is just because it wasn't always like this. Neocons weren't always dominant within the Republican
Yeah.
Party. That's why we have that term paleo-conservative. And also, I mean, we used to have Republicans that would question Israel, like Reagan during the Lebanon War,
Yes. If
like
you
George H.W. Bush, who literally went toe-to-toe with AIPAC.
The regular ass pro-Zionist Republican right now, if they read Reagan's diaries, would have to come away, if they're consistent, saying Reagan was an anti-Semite because he criticized this Israeli official and this Israeli official. When Reagan pulled out of Lebanon after the Beirut bombing in '83, and he said the Middle Eastern politics was irrational and we needed to get American troops out of there, you can go back, the prominent neoconservatives of the time, including people like Newt Gingrich and whatnot. George Will was like this at the time. All pounced on Reagan and basically called him a pansy. He's weak. He's giving away the nuclear store. This is the weakest thing. They all attacked Reagan for doing he didn't made the right decision. They attacked Reagan for meeting with Gorbachev. The greatest legacy Reagan has is reducing nuclear proliferation, and his meetings with Gorbachev. All those neocons, those hard right people at the time, attacked Reagan for meeting with Gorbachev. They hate diplomacy. Diplomacy could negate a possible war. That's why when Kamala Harris was
Yeah,
running around like,
it even goes beyond Israel, to be honest, with
yes, it
neocons in
does.
that sense. They're just pro-empire.
They're just pro-empire. That's what they think American conservatism is. Everybody at home can suffer as much as they need to so we can have this empire. That's not conservatism proper. That's what they are. And people like Mark Levin got to define that for so long. And his old asses on Sunday nights on Fox News. I swear, I think that show is just for Trump at this point. I'm not saying other people don't watch it, but the purpose of it is hey, Trump, this is why war with Iran is still great, even though it's obvious to anybody with a lick of sense that it's not going well. That's what that show is.
I guess though what I'm trying to get at is and maybe we can word this in two different ways. Or it can be two different questions. How did we get from Robert Taft to any non-interventionist being essentially shut out of the party? I mean, they were shut out of the major publications like the National Review, and any
Yeah.
non-interventionist conservatives were pushed out. And now, though, on the other hand, we're seeing the return of that type of non-interventionist conservatism. So, how did you like? What's your view on how we got here?
It was mostly born of the Cold War. People remember when Taft ran against Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was the more interventionist guy. This is the guy who, when he left the presidency, warned about the military-industrial complex. But like Taft was the most more non-interventionist Republican, and Dwight was the more internationalist. But that model of Republican, left office saying, "Hey, this military-industrial complex is getting out of control. We need to do something about this." So that's where the Republican Party was. When William F. Buckley, when he founded National Review, argued, "Hey, we are for small government and a smaller state and less spending, but this Cold War threat is unique, and if it requires a larger state till we, meet this Soviet threat and defeat it, we can do that for a time, then we'll go back to the old-timey conservatism." Well, the wall fell in 89. Scorpions had a great song about it, Winds of Change. And people like Pat Buchanan, who'd been a staunch Cold Warrior, and Robert Novak and others were like, "Hey, we did it. We beat them. Let's get
Now
back
we
to
can go back to national interest
let's go
conservatism. We
back
don't
to that."
have
And
to
the
go to war.
neocons are like, "Hell no. Bosnia, we got that going on. Saddam Hussein, wait, we were friends with him. Okay, well, guess what? He's bad now. He has WMDs. Any excuse. Gaddafi, oh my God, he's the next Hitler too." Like all the next Hitlers, they're finding excuses to continue what was before. That's how we got here. William F. Buckley, in his last days, think what you want about him. A lot of negative things have been said, and I think rightfully so. Tucker Carlson said a lot of things whose brother's name is Buckley or whatever, or son, I don't know, I'm getting that right backward. William F. Buckley was asked by George Will, what is the legacy of George W. Bush in the Iraq War? And Buckley basically said, "This is a complete disaster. He's a failed president. He's not a conservative of any sort." So even he had that memory. And National Review didn't have much to say about William F. Buckley in his later years, precisely because they'd been taken over by neocons and didn't want to hear that from their founder, around the time Ron Paul was running for president.
So why do you think now that the tides are turning? Because I remember when I was in college, I was a big supporter of Ron Paul, and it was, to be honest, it was almost exclusively because of his foreign
Yeah,
policy views. I remember when he was at the debates and, Giuliani was yelling at him, "How dare you blame us for 9/11?" I was so riled up because I said, what do you mean he's blaming us for 9/11? He's talking about blowback. The
right.
CIA talks about blowback, but now the tides have turned where, the Giulianis are on the outs.
They have the neocons represented by people like Giuliani. They still have the institutional power, and you're seeing that in this Trump administration. Like all the people who hated Trump's guts, Lindsey Graham navigated this, but like he didn't. He probably wanted Kamala Harris to win, and now that Trump's doing what he's doing, he's ecstatic. But like those people didn't like him precisely because they thought he was going to do what I voted for him to do, which is what he said he was going to do. They still have the institutional power, but as far as the debate and what you can say and where the American people are at, I think Trump might be ushering in the end of American empire. The Make America Great Again might be the first president that's marshaled that. And what I mean by that is you can go to London today. It's awesome place. Fish and chips. Love it. The Clash, whatever. England. You can go there. There used to be a British Empire and then there wasn't. And that doesn't make England any better or worse. It's just the empire ended. The American empire can end, and America is just as great as it ever was. And I would like to see it end. Pat Buchanan's book, A Republic, Not an Empire, that kind of thinking. I think we might be at the tail end of this for the foreign policy decisions that are being made that are so disastrous. And also, we're $39 trillion in debt. When the Tea Party thing was going on and they were mad at Obama talking about Republicans on the right, we were like $11 trillion in debt. When Ronald Reagan was 1980 preaching fiscal conservatism, and he went against that too, he spent too much money, we were $980 billion in debt, and he was worried about it. We're $39 trillion in debt with a Republican Congress and Republican president who just did one of the biggest Pentagon spending packages of all time. that can't last forever.
I also wanted to ask you, since you mentioned the empire there, I do think that is important to talk about because, it's not just Israel. It's U.S. wants to go on adventures everywhere, it seems like. Whether it's Cuba or Venezuela. And my view is actually more in line with the libertarian view of unless it's a threat, then I don't care. And, I don't want some lobby dictating to the American
Yeah,
people we need to go to war. I don't even want a war with China. It's
right. It should be a threat. Ostensibly, there could be some other reason where it's in our national interest to do something militarily that's not necessarily that, maybe, but it's never that. It's always certainly in the interest of Israel or in the interest of defense contractors. And it drives me crazy when pro-war Democrats or Republicans will say, "Well, this money we're spending the jobs creates jobs at home for Raytheon and what? That's what Dwight Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. You're saying, yeah, so yeah,
that's the one area where I will say I do get where people come from on the I guess the like you said the Israel fixation when it becomes well, if Israel just disappeared, if the U.S. Israel special relationship, I should say,
mhm.
disappeared, the empire would just go away overnight. I don't think that's true either, though.
No, it would look different than that, but I think we are on a lower end than a higher end right now. People had an appetite for the Iraq War that the appetite more than they had since Vietnam. It was 9/11 that did that, but the actual Iraq War evaporated that. People didn't want another one. Trump got a lot of votes for promising not to get us into another one. Now we're in another one, and polling before and after has shown it overwhelmingly unpopular across the board. So, and the younger you go, the more unpopular it gets. So,
I also wanted to get your thoughts as a principled libertarian on Hassan Piker and Cenk from the Young Turks not being allowed into the UK because I know some on the right are saying, well, what comes around goes around. I get it. But I've seen other libertarians saying this is unacceptable.
well, it is unacceptable. Look, I share Cenk Uger's stuff a lot, and people are like, "Oh, he's on the left." Yeah, no kidding. And he's saying this great thing about the Iran war right now. He's saying this about how detestable this genocide is. He's saying this great thing about civil liberties. I care about the thing. I don't care about other things where we disagree. That's what I care about. That's what the people who I love Trump, I hate Trump. They can't get past that. You got a lot of libertarians like that. I think not only is it bad for them individually, but it's scary. They're in trouble because they've criticized Israel. Their speech has prevented them from entering a Western, supposedly democratic country. And there are people in this country that want those kind of rules and laws in the Trump administration. Ron DeSantis has been for this in his own state. Certain kind of speech is not allowed. And are we going to get to the point where, oh, you can't travel, you're going to get locked up? That's what part of the reason I voted for Trump is he promised to do the opposite of that when Kamala Harris and Biden were wanting these, what was it, government disinformation centers and all that, where some government official decides what's real and what's not, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is great." And you looked at Democrats, and say, "Oh yeah, we need this. These right wingers, oh they're lying." Blah. I'm like, hell no. And now you got the right wing version of it in response to criticism of Israel. So when I think of Cenk Uygur and Piker being denied entrance, that's where my mind goes. We should be worried about that. That's a warning to Americans.
And on my end, I even told people recently, Ken Klippenstein, the great reporter,
Mhm.
did that whole thing on Sebastian Gorka, Trump's senior director for counterterrorism, suggesting that Tucker Carlson should be considered potentially a domestic extremist.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, you don't have to like Tucker. And I've said that to people. You don't have to like him. I don't care. This is bad news because they go after him, they'll go after,
You
Hassan, they'll
know,
go after everyone.
authoritarians of all stripe, left and right, make this argument. When the Black Lives Matter riots were happening in my years are off, I think most people know what I'm talking about. A number of years ago, pre-COVID, Tom Cotton wrote that op-ed for the New York Times suggesting that we should enact martial law and send troops, and basically said these people were domestic terrorists. Now, do I agree with vandalizing property? No, you arrest those people and charge them with, you know, vandalism or whatever. Um, but when you start labeling the citizens of your own country terrorists, that's a problem. And Tom Cotton was wrong to say that. Rand Paul, my old boss, spoke out against that. He's like, this shouldn't be going on. We need law enforcement to do this, but we're not turning in this into a war on terror situation, Senator Cotton. Sorry. Same goes for J6. There was a riot on Capitol Hill on January 6, 2021. That's it. It wasn't an overthrow of the government. Those weren't domestic terrorists. And Democrats, part of their identity was those were definitely domestic terrorists. Well, they could have done that to some of your folks with the Black Lives Matter thing. You see what I'm getting at? There's left and right versions of that, and both every time, whether I make conservatives mad or progressives mad, I'm like, nope, not a domestic terrorism situation. These are American citizens with First Amendment rights and constitutional rights, and you're not going to do that to them. That's what that means. Is let's get rid of the Constitution and their constitutional protections, and let's use extra constitutional punishment. And that's wrong.
Before we close out, one more thing I wanted to touch upon with you is I've had this frustration lately with I guess it's been going on 10 years of people trying to rehabilitate George W. Bush because they dislike Trump so much. And I'm frustrated with everything because, you know, Bush was the imperial presidency. He opened a lot of doors that can't be closed now when it comes to executive power being used and abused. And you know what? Obama did too when he killed
Yep.
Anwar al-Awlaki. And everyone wants to talk about whatever the, non-scandal is happening, but they don't want to talk about Obama killed a U.S. citizen, droned a
Yep.
U.S. citizen, and that opens the door for, well, anyone's an enemy combatant. Who can they go after next?
Right.
And all of these doors were opened by Bush and Obama, and now we're seeing the even more rotten fruits of that. Do you want to comment on that? How this whole era of just GWAT,
Yeah.
global war on terror, surveillance nanny state BS has really come back to haunt the American people.
Talking about how people feel about it, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. There was a time in this country, if you were on the left, if you voted Democrat, where there was no greater villains at all than George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. You hated them with every ounce of your being. You hated their Patriot Act. You hated their stupid war, whatnot. The new version of that is Donald Trump. George W. Bush still has his legacy. Dick Cheney has his legacy. It's awful. One of the worst presidencies of my life. It was the worst until what's going on right now, which we could debate. But that's where that came from. It was less anti-war and more anti-George W. Bush. You saw that because when Obama got in office, by being an anti-war candidate and denouncing the Iraq War, he pretty much continued all of Bush's policies for the most part. He didn't even get out of Afghanistan. Biden did that. If you love Barack Obama, you forget about all that war stuff because you love Barack Obama. The immigration stuff, the left protests ICE and whatnot. I agree with a lot of those protests. I don't want innocent people, certainly not American citizens, rounded up and deported. That's happened. But when Obama was doing that, and Latino groups were calling him the deporter in chief, he had the record for the most deportations until what Trump's doing. You didn't hear the same people bitching about ICE saying, oh, this is awful, because they loved Obama. And George W. Bush might have used to been the bad guy coming from a left perspective, but now Trump's here and Bush doesn't like Trump. So we like Bush now. He's okay. I know that sounds dumb, and it is dumb, but that's the basis of that. The people who say that will never admit it, but if you analyze it for just a second, that's really where they're coming from.
I agree, but I guess what I'm asking you is, do you think there is this connect the dots that people need to do to understand how we got here, where we're seeing a lot of presidential abuses happen, but it's because of the previous administrations that did the
Yes.
same things.
Yeah,
And no one wants to address that. Yeah.
they should see it, and depending on who they like or don't like, aren't going to see it because that's more important to them than what's true. And that's politics, by the way. I'm a big professional wrestling fan, and it's dawned on me as I gotten older and gotten into politics that part of why I like
Politics is kayfabe.
the difference between professional wrestling fans and political fans is political fans think what they're watching is real. And I'm not some conspiracy theorist that thinks everything's fabricated. I worked on Capitol Hill, and a lot of those people can't even, keep their grocery list straight. Like, that's true. I'm surprised they get anything done. But at the same time, if you're in the Bush era, a term like Islamofascist is there for a reason. They're working their audience. Like, oh, all those Muslims, watch out for them. They're working their audience. It's no different than the Iron Sheik saying America, like it's that kind of stuff. And that's where January 6ers are all domestic terrorists. Oh, they're no different. They're, domestic ISIS or whatever. No, they're not. They're American citizens who acted a fool one day. That's what happened. And one person got killed, unfortunately. But the moment you categorize it that there, it's whoever's in control politically working their base
Well,
to
it's the same with I know you've spoken out against the killing of Alex Preddy as well,
yeah,
and you'll have people that say,
absolutely.
well, he deserved it, yeah.
Yeah, and they have to say that because they have to blanket what actually happened, and it's working the audience. That's exactly what it is. Um, and that doesn't mean you have to like professional wrestling. I don't know what's wrong with you if you don't, but like it works the same way. I think Lee Atwater. I was talking with somebody whose name I'll leave out of it recently, who's older than me and was a young Republican activist. Lee Atwater was an aide to George H.W. Bush and a speechwriter for Reagan and whatnot. But he, on his deathbed, not on his deathbed, he did something else on his deathbed, but he would tell young activists, including the guy I'm talking about, he's like, if you want to understand the American voter, read Life magazine and watch professional wrestling. That was his advice to the young Republican activists. And he was a big wrestling fan, but he's not wrong. He wanted them to understand the popular culture and how an audience is, which was his specialty. That's what he did for a living.
What was
So
that? You cut out there for a second.
that is, it's all about working an audience. That's why Lee Atwater would give that advice as a strategist. He's the one that came up with the detestable Willie Horton ads when Dukakis was running in '88, and then recanted on about that on his deathbed. But he was doing that for a reason. He was saying, "Hey, here's these scary black people. They might get you. Vote for George H.W. Bush, or vote. I guess that would have been Bob. No, that was the Bush election. But he was working the audience, and he was saying, "Hey, professional wrestling. That's what politics is. Learn about it." And it's true.
So I don't want to leave it on such a dark
Sure.
note because I feel like you're saying, everyone's just engaged in their
No, that's not.
tribalism. Yeah,
I
I don't think that's what you're saying. I think you're much more optimistic, actually.
no, I'm very optimistic. If people laugh at me when I say I'm optimistic because my expectations of human beings are so low. Like we live in a fallen world. Like we're messed up. Adam screwed up. Like going all the way back. Like we're a mess. Christ's apostles were a mess. St. Peter denied Christ 3 times and got to make up for it later, thanks to Jesus saying, "Hey, do you love me?" 3 times. My point is, I'm not trying to give you it all biblical, is human beings, I have very low expectations. So we don't have to, a little bit of good stuff happens. Yeah, I think that's great. I'm always up. Um, I mean, hopefully that's a brighter note. I am not somebody that walks around all dark and dreary. I
I
think
guess
it's
though, why are you optimistic?
because every creation around me is like amazing that it even exists. Like, imagine the sun didn't exist and then one day it did. You'd be the holy crap, look at that. I think G.K. Chesterton said something like, children are closest to God because everything is new to them. Like if you never saw a hummingbird ever in your life and all of a sudden you saw a hummingbird, what would the whole world think? Like, oh my Lord, what is this? This is the craziest damn thing I've ever seen. We live in that world where miracles are around us all the time. We're just used to them. And how wonderful is that? Like maybe that's a broad, weird way of saying why I'm optimistic, but that's been my general worldview even when I was less religious. I've always thought that, like, what the hell is all this? How am I alive? How do I have this wonderful mom and dad? And I, grew up getting into breakdancing in the fourth grade and watched the A Team on Tuesday nights when I could stay up later if I had a good report card. Like, I know that sounds corny and granular, but like, what a wonderful life, charmed life I have. Other people, I feel bad when I complain about something. I'm like, there's some kid in Gaza getting in, like, the whole family got blown up, and I'm worried about, oh, my favorite restaurant's closed on a Monday, We live in a wonderful world, especially as Americans. What charmed lives we live.
So also, I have to ask you here in closing, it's completely off topic from politics. But what kind of wrestling did you grow up on? Were you a WWE guy or like a Southern wrestling NWA WCW
Yeah.
guy?
So I'm, any person of a certain age growing up in the Carolinas, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. I was a Jim Crockett Promotions, Ric Flair's The Man
Right
with
on.
Dusty Rhodes. And I watched, I was the age, I was, 8, 9, 10 when Hulkamania was going on. So I watched all that too. But my attitude about it was, yeah, Hulkamania, he's going to slam Andre. That's cool. That's the cartoon wrestling. The real wrestling is Jim Crockett Promotions. That was my
Yeah,
attitude as
I'm
well.
like that. I'm the kid that like I mean it's before my time, but I love watching the older wrestling. Like I would love watching a guy like Stan Hansen just lariat
Oh,
someone. And
totally.
that to me is so much. I like that more than the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, the Ultimate Warrior's fun, but Stan Hansen
Yeah.
lariat, oh,
Absolutely. And then you get older and you learn that Stan Hansen's practically blind and he just couldn't see what he was doing and knocked the hell out of everybody. That even makes it better. We've seen a little taste of this for anybody that's a wrestling fan out there. What's going on with AAA and El Grande Americano, the match that just happened, and how much people are into it and believing it. They even know who the people are already under those masks, and they just buy it. That's how it felt for me as a kid watching Jim Crockett Promotions. Like, I liked Flair and the Horsemen, but I knew that they were bad guys, but I thought they were cool. It was kind of like NWO before NWO. But when they tied Dusty to a van and hell out of his arm, I'm like, those sons of bitches. Something needs to be done about this, and it was. So yeah, and that's politics.
I was going to say it's crazy. I'm in Florida right now, and
Ooh,
I still meet people to this day that will remember the days of
Florida
the Graham
Championship
family.
Wrestling.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
Eddie
Kevin
Graham and Mike
Sullivan,
Graham.
Dusty. Yeah. Eddie
There
Graham,
was a
Mike Graham.
great piece during Ron Paul's first run in 2008, and I can't remember who wrote it, at LouRockwell.com from a Floridian talking about the history of Florida Championship Wrestling at the libertarian site, LouRockwell.com. I'll have to Google it or find it.
I need to read that. And then I grew up in Pittsburgh, so everyone in Pittsburgh knew Bruno.
Absolutely. Kurt Angle's also from Pittsburgh, but Bruno's, locally.
Well, Bruno's the original.
He is the original. And, he had that WWF title for 7 years until Ivan Koloff beat him for it.
He got it a second time, too.
He
after
did.
the Pedro
Absolutely.
Morales one.
And that was an era where he was an Italian and they were in New York. And, that makes sense, sort of the ethnic heroes. But yeah, we could go on and on about this, but that's a whole other show.
Well, I'm going to hold you to that. We'll have to talk wrestling next time.
Anytime you like. I'd love
Thanks
to.
So much, Jack. And how can my listeners keep up with your work?
Probably the easiest way. I share everything I do on X at Jack Hunter 74. You can hear me talk about wrestling, heavy metal, politics, and probably some Israel. We're going to talk about that sometimes.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Aaron, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Nobody, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.